When it comes to the Twin Snakes, people always say the same things.
The voice acting is so much worse than the original. The music isn't as iconic as the original. It doesn't have the same atmosphere as the original.
Every single time you hear one of these criticisms, it's somebody echoing something that somebody else said on Reddit, or Twitter, or 4chan, or any other cesspool on the internet where everybody has to share a single brain cell that's been collecting dust for years. It's too bad, really, because there are a lot of people out there who would really like the Twin Snakes, but they've been discouraged from even trying the game by people who suck the life out of any room they find themselves in. Life is short, right? And people just don't have time to waste on a game that might not be worth the precious seconds they have left. So I don't blame anybody for being on the fence about MGS 1's only remake. But if you're trying to wrap your head around Metal Gear's complicated narrative and you don't include the Twin Snakes in the canon, you're not getting the full story. So let's play Metal Gear Mythbusters and go over some of the reasons why the Twin Snakes deserves way more praise than it gets. The voice acting in the Twin Snakes is absolutely worse than the original, and even if you understand the legal and financial reasons why it's not as good, that doesn't change the fact that the voices in the original game are just better. Something that you can't unhear once you've been made aware of it is that David Hayter always sounded like he was doing an impression of himself after MGS 1. His performance in that first game was just lightning in a bottle, but for whatever reason, when he came back to the character for MGS 2 and the Twin Snakes, he just wasn't able to find that voice again. Part of that might be because known racist and card-carrying pedophile Hideous Kojakass didn't like all the liberties that Jeremy Blaustein took with MGS 1, so Agnes Kaku was brought in to translate MGS 2. Based on interviews she's given in the past, Kaku didn't regard the game's writing very highly, and she was absolutely right because that shit is fucking trash. But what I'm saying is, maybe she didn't treat the job with the same reverence that Blaustein did, and maybe that lack of reverence carried over to Chris Zimmerman's voice direction. Whatever the case may be, the end result was that Snake never sounded as pitch perfect as he did when Hayter first played the character. David Hayter deserves a ton of credit though. Famously, he gave up half of his paycheck so that all of MGS 1's original cast could return for the remake. At the time, video game companies had zero loyalty to their voice actors, and that's why 5 different people have played Leon Kennedy over the years. That's a lot of dudes. So I don't want anybody accusing me of hating on Hayter, because as far as I'm concerned, that guy's a class act. However, there is one thing Hayter said that needs to be corrected, because way too many people just blindly accept it as the truth. In episode 111 of Evil Avatar Radio, Hayter said that the house they used to record MGS 1 in didn't have any soundproofing, so the microphones picked up the sounds of the outside traffic. Supposedly, all the dialogue had to be re-recorded for the Twin Snakes because the GameCube had greater audio fidelity than the PS1. So when the original audio was played on the newer hardware, you could suddenly hear the sounds of cars driving by. Unfortunately, my 20 years of audio engineering experience and I are here to tell you that is simply not true. Most of the audio files for MGS 1 have been available on YouTube for a while now, and it all sounds pretty great considering it's almost 30 years old, and interestingly enough, you can't hear oncoming traffic in any of it.
Snake, be careful. There are claymore mines around there. Use a mine detector.
Hayter's explanation about the lack of soundproofing sounds like something that was told to him and he just had no reason to believe it wasn't true. Or he just misunderstood, because to be fair, there is some truth to the story. Series voice director Chris Zimmerman said multiple times on Ryan Payton's Kojakass Productions report that a lot of the takes they recorded were ruined by vehicle noise. But she clarifies that they just didn't use those takes. She never says that you can hear cars in the takes that wound up going into the game. So the next time you hear somebody say that they had to re-record the dialogue in the Twin Snakes because of car noises, you can tell them that I said they shouldn't believe everything they hear on the internet. I don't know where it started, but when the fanboys get backed into a corner and they're forced to admit how ridiculous it is to say that a remake of a canon game isn't canon, then as a compromise, they learn to say that they consider MGS 1 to be how things really went down, and the Twin Snakes is how Otacon remembers it. It's frustrating because, like I said at the start of this, no one ever comes to this conclusion on their own. They're just repeating something that some other fanboy said. Sometimes I wish I could find the person who first said that so I could go back and give their parents the old Kaswan Booster. I'm just kidding. Or am I? Look, if you think the Twin Snakes is somehow less legitimate than the original game, then I'm sorry to disappoint you, because the remake is actually the more accurate version of events. And how do we know? Ironically, it's because of the lower quality voice acting. When you go back to Shadow Moses in MGS4, the audio flashbacks you hear as you explore the facility use the voices from the Twin Snakes, not the original game, because somebody realized how strange it was that two women who grew up in the United States sounded like they were from other countries. That's why they had to re-record all the dialogue for the Twin Snakes, to make the characters sound more consistent throughout the series, not because you could hear traffic sounds in the original audio. Personally, I think this was a terrible decision, because the original game felt more like a spy movie, since it sounded like your support team was composed of specialists from all over the world. I also think Naomi and Mei Ling's accents added a lot of depth to their character backstories. When somebody has an accent, it creates the impression that at some point, they've had to adjust to the new culture they found themselves in, and it makes you wonder if they've ever struggled with homesickness or trying not to lose sight of where they came from. People with accents are just automatically interesting by default, because you know they have an interesting story to tell. And the reason why you get into Metal Gear in the first place, the reason why you're watching this video, is because of the storytelling. That being said, even though I personally prefer how Naomi and Mei Ling sound in the original, the writers intended for them to be from the United States. Though I guess from their perspective, America's a pretty exotic place, so I can understand why they felt the voices had to be updated. The key word there is updated, because this kind of thing happens all the time. There have been tons of creators in the past who jumped at the chance to improve their past works. Just look at Tolkien. After he wrote The Lord of the Rings, he went back and revised The Hobbit so that the overall story would be more consistent with the new lore he created. For a more modern example, look no further than the second season of Wait a minute, hold on. Why the hell am I trying to justify retcons in a video about Metal Gear? Anyway, there's this other coping mechanism that people throw around thoughtlessly, and it's hilarious whenever I see it, because people always act like they figured out who really shot JFK. They say something like, I always figured that the Twin Snakes was one of Raiden's VR training simulations. This is actually halfway correct. It's just backwards. The original Metal Gear Solid is the simulation. Wait, I take that back. As I explained in this video, both the original and the remake are training sims, but between the two, the Twin Snakes is the more faithful recreation. This is confirmed in MGS2 when you call Snake with the PSG-1 equipped.
Although you've probably fired a few rounds in VR training, there are a few differences in handling the rifle you should be aware of. First, that the PSG-1 is equipped with a special magnification adjustable scope. For precision shooting, it allows you to zoom in on your target, and for wide range viewing, all you have to do is zoom out. Another difference is that you aren't limited to firing from the prone position. In short, you can fire from a crouching or standing position.
So the Twin Snakes can't be the simulation because unlike the original game, you can shoot standing, crouched, or prone. You can zoom in and out too, just like Snake said. So how do I explain the flashbacks from the original game that we see throughout Guns of the Patriots? Firstly, I just want to reiterate that both games are canon. I never said that the Twin Snakes is canon and the original game isn't, so you can stop writing that comment because you look like an idiot. Secondly, I gotta point out that those flashbacks are still images with a ton of visual noise and distortion. That would indicate that Snake is struggling to remember details from his past because his memory has been affected by his accelerated aging. Same thing with the dream sequence at the start of that section of the game. It's a dream sequence. He's still in a dream, Snake Eater. And dreams never play out the same way as the memories that inspire them. That reminds me of a study from a while back that showed that whenever people remember something, they're actually remembering the last time they remembered that thing, so memories can change drastically over time. But that study was published after MGS4 came out, so obviously that's not what the writers intended. This is just my attempt to make sense of another inconsistency within the Metal Gear series using the information that the games provide. Sometimes I come across one or several dozen people who refuse to accept that the Twin Snakes is canon because they just don't like it. And that's obviously a really stupid reason to deny facts, right? I mean, I don't like the Phantom Pain, or Guns of the Patriots, or Snake Eater, or Sons of Liberty, but what kind of lore keeper would I be if I just ignored all the stuff I didn't like? A lot of people don't like the Twin Snakes because of how insane the action sequences are compared to the other games in the series. And everybody who thinks that is full of shit, because if somebody was looking for a grounded experience, the one game they wouldn't play is Metal Gear. I haven't shied away from the fact that I think the quality of the storytelling in the Metal Gear series is a hot pile of wet, nasty garbage. And one of the reasons why I feel that way is because the writing comes across as self-important, despite the fact that its own message is constantly undermined by juvenile slapstick.
It insists upon itself, Lois.
Thank you, Peter. I agree wholeheartedly. If you ever get a chance to talk to someone who thinks the Twin Snakes is too goofy or cartoony, ask them why they think so much of the comedy throughout the series revolves around grade school toilet humor. Then just sit back and watch as all the cognitive dissonance gives them an aneurysm. For people like me who find themselves disillusioned by how seriously the fans take Metal Gear's story, one of the major selling points for the Twin Snakes is that it doesn't take itself seriously at all. It's self-aware as opposed to self-important, and because of that, Ryuhei Kitamura's direction led to some of the most entertaining action sequences in the entire franchise. I'd even go so far as to say that the Cyborg Ninja Hallway Massacre stands up to some of the most iconic scenes in cinema history, as some of the techniques that Kitamura used are the same ones that Matt Reeves employed in The Batman 18 years later. Some people just prefer the original game over the remake though, and that's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, I prefer the original too. It was the first game in the series I played, so it has a lot of nostalgic and sentimental value to me. But again, personal preference isn't a good enough reason to deny facts. So this goes out to the people who get upset when I inform them that the Twin Snakes is more accurate than the original, even though both games are canon and both games have inconsistencies due to retcons. I often see people complain that it doesn't make sense for the Twin Snakes to be canon because Solid Snake doesn't do crazy stuff like backflipping onto a missile in any of the other games. In response to that, the most polite and respectful thing I can say is, what the fuck are you talking about? The very first thing we see Solid Snake do in Sons of Liberty is sprint off the George Washington Bridge before twirling through the air like a ballerina. And the apple don't fall far from the tree neither, because Naked Snake starts the virtuous mission with his best impression of Samus Aran. I admit though, the stunts we see in MGS 2 and 3 are still more believable than throwing a live grenade from half court perfectly into the howitzer of an M1 Abrams like Snake was auditioning to be on Dude Perfect. What makes it a superhuman feat isn't the fact that he did it, it's the fact that he did it on the first try. So why is it that at no other point in Snake's career does he do anything so unbelievably badass? I'm glad you asked, because as it just so happens, there's a lore-accurate reason for that. You see, the Shadow Moses incident was the only point in Solid Snake's lifetime that he was enhanced by nanomachines. Damn it, now I gotta talk about nanomachines. Fuck! It's a running joke that nanomachines are the solution to all of Metal Gear's problems. But then people blew that joke out of proportion and decided that MGS4 has bad writing. And it does, but it's not because of nanomachines. Damn it, now I gotta make a separate video about MGS4. Fuck! Watch your back, Bentley. I'm coming for you. Anyway, in Guns of the Patriots you learn that nanomachines are magic. They can do anything. For example, nanomachines were what allowed Vamp to run on water and up sheer vertical walls. Early in the game, Naomi Hunter explains that there are different generations of nanomachines. Raiden was implanted with second-gen nanos, but we don't know which generation Vamp used. It doesn't matter though, because Naomi injected Snake with the first-gen nanos that she created, the same nanomachines that were used to resurrect Gray Fox, regulate his emotions, and enhance his reaction time. So, aside from the exoskeleton, it was possible for Solid Snake to have the same enhancements as the Cyborg Ninja during the Shadow Moses incident. It's also important to note that the Patriots used Snake as a puppet throughout his life, and this was especially true in Shadow Moses, where he was used as the vector for the Foxdie virus. Using nanomachines, the Patriots' AIs could have given Snake whatever abilities he needed to ensure that he came into contact with all of the virus's targets. So everything Snake does in the game was part of the Patriots' master plan, which was technically Ocelot's master plan. At the end of MGS1, Snake says the government won't be able to track him and Meryl because the batteries on the nanomachines are about to die. But this had to be retconned so that the story of MGS4 could work. In Guns of the Patriots, Naomi explains that Snake's first-gen nanomachines are actually charged by body heat. It is a retcon, but technically, Naomi never explained how the nanomachines worked, and when Snake got it wrong, she just didn't correct him, even though she could have. But that's not important. Regardless of whether Snake still had nanomachines in his bloodstream, he still needed a technician to control what he could do. Like when Naomi made it so that he couldn't use weapons in the Warhead storage building. That means the nanomachines were essentially useless after the Shadow Moses incident, the only time in Snake's life where his abilities were technologically enhanced. And interestingly enough, Snake's actions in the remake are consistent with Raiden's, who was also enhanced by nanomachines. In Sons of Liberty, Raiden's default mode of transportation is gymnastics. He flips over here. He flips over there. He even flips without any underwear. He's also able to deflect supersonic ammunition with a sword, because just like the cyborg ninja, his reaction times were enhanced to superhuman levels. After taking the time to explain all that though, I just realized, Snake didn't really have an opportunity to do crazy stuff like a 360 quickscope after MGS 1. You barely play as him in MGS 2 and he's got osteoporosis in MGS 4. So the whole thing about Snake not doing crazy stuff in the other games is a stupid complaint. Kitamura choreographed the cutscenes that way because it's entertaining, so if you don't like the Twin Snakes, you probably also don't like John Woo movies, or The Matrix, and if that's the case you need to leave because this channel is for fun-havers only.
You need to leave!
There's a particular scene in the Twin Snakes that people use as justification to hate on the game, and it's honestly depressing to think about. The scene in question is the one where President Baker forgets Meryl's codec frequency. In the original game, Snake voices his frustration under his breath, but for the most part, he's unfazed. In the Twin Snakes, though, he reacts like this.
Damn!
A while back, somebody decided that this reaction wasn't true to Snake's character. Fairly recently, actually, I saw a comment that said that the real Solid Snake would never point a gun at a defenseless old man. And I gotta say, Kenneth Baker is not a defenseless old man. The word you're looking for is defense contractor. Let me put a couple things into perspective for you. Solid Snake was retired. All he wanted was to live a quiet life with his dogs, but one day, armed men pull him out of his bed, then he finds out that somebody who looks exactly like him is trying to start World War III. So Snake swims by himself to the world's largest walk-in freezer, and it's there that he's told that his government, the government that he fought and bled for, is building the same doomsday weapon that he suffered through nightmare after post-traumatic stress-induced nightmare to destroy. Twice! And guess who spearheaded the project? It was Kenneth Baker, president of ArmsTech. If Baker hadn't decided to build Metal Gear Rex, the entire Shadow Moses incident would have never happened.
Damn!
Here's a question for you. What was the purpose of Outer Heaven? That's right. Big Boss was trying to create a world where soldiers would always have a place in society, instead of being exploited as cannon fodder and then left in the gutter to rot after they served their purpose. What do you think drove a man like Big Boss to take such European extreme measures? Ironically, Baker says it best.
Just call it the military-industrial complex.
A system perpetuated by weapons manufacturers like ArmsTech and their White House lobbyists who forced the United States to be at war with somebody at all times. So look at this scene from Snake's perspective, through Snake's eyes, if you will. Companies like ArmsTech are directly responsible for creating the circumstances that led to monsters like Big Boss, as well as copycats like his newfound twin brother. So for Baker to be so careless, for him to show so little remorse for his actions, for him to be so apathetic as to forget the phone number of the person who has the one thing that could help Snake prevent an international disaster from claiming an untold number of lives, this is precisely the right reaction to that. If anything, it's a testament to Snake's character that he was able to get back to the mission instead of pulling the trigger. That shows a lot of self-control, because if you ask me, Baker deserved a hell of a lot worse. The crazy part is, when I first saw this scene in the remake, I thought it was funny, and I think Kitamura intended for it to be funny, which is exactly why so many people don't like this scene. These days though, whenever I replay MGS 1, I make a point to give Baker a piece of my mind during the fight with Ocelot, and that makes me feel a little bit better, but only a little bit. Because when people complain that this scene is too cartoony, it's a sad reminder that we live in a corporate hellscape where people will rush to the aid of a greedy arms dealer who got fat by lining his pockets with the tax dollars that his company took away from schools and hospitals. But the ones doing the complaining aren't the problem, because it's not their fault. What makes this situation so depressing is the fact that the story I just told isn't the one being told by the game. The game's writers are the ones who portrayed Baker as a defenseless old man. You're only just now looking at the scene in a different light because of the additional context that I provided.
What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context?
Well, would you look at that? Like the snake biting its tail, it all comes back full circle. Does the Twin Snakes have worse music and atmosphere than the original game? Absolutely. But it's always strange when people cite that as one of the reasons why the Twin Snakes isn't worth playing, because they never make the same complaint about MGS 2. The score for the original Metal Gear Solid was by far the best in the series. It's some of the most iconic music in video game history. No matter how amazing the music in the other games is, none of it comes anywhere close to the soundtrack for MGS1, and no one would dare say otherwise. Metal Gear Solid's atmosphere is what makes it an all-time classic. The soundtrack to that game makes the environments feel the way they look. The sense of atmosphere is so thick, it's like the deep end of a pool that you can just dive in. Snake Eater's another example of strong art direction working in perfect harmony with incredible sound design. The game's music and the ambient noise of the jungle did an amazing job of immersing the player, so it's no surprise that MGS3 is seen as the best game in the series. The sense of atmosphere in that game was so good that most people were able to look past the abysmal game loop that forces you to pause the game every 30 seconds to play Dress Up. I think that's why it was so disappointing when MGS Delta was revealed, because at the time, it looked like they were going to get rid of the color filter that gave the original game its signature look. That hazy filter made the jungle feel more dense than it actually was, but more importantly than that, proper color grading gives you insight into the emotions that a particular scene is trying to evoke, and that's another level of immersion that people were afraid would be missing from the remake. In comparison to MGS1 and MGS3, the atmosphere of Sons of Liberty is thinner than a tortilla that Fat Man sat on. Am I saying MGS2 was bad because of that? Of course not. The terrible writing is what makes it bad. All I'm saying is that MGS2's atmosphere isn't as good as it was in the other games. The Twin Snakes is just Metal Gear Solid with the same gameplay and atmosphere of MGS2. And interestingly enough, no one who's criticized the remake has ever levied that same criticism at Sons of Liberty. And we know why. We know why. Some people just can't look at things objectively because the logic center of their brain has been adversely affected by a fanboy-sized tumor. Now that I think about it, I would actually say that the sense of atmosphere in the Twin Snakes is a slight improvement over MGS2, but only because the Shadow Moses incident took place at night. The darker areas create moody shadows that make the characters feel more like three-dimensional objects. In comparison, the bright sunlight in MGS2 normalizes the contrast in the scene, so all the models feel flatter than that same tortilla from a minute ago. That's not to say that MGS2 doesn't look amazing at times. The opening scene when Snake first lands on the tanker is timeless. That'll never not look good. Same thing goes for the various sections of Arsenal gear. All I'm saying is that the Twin Snakes has more stuff like that, and why wouldn't you want more of a good thing? Well, I guess when you're a member of the KFP, that's the Kojak-ass Fellatio Party, you'd rather eat a bucket full of his bullshit than admit that somebody actually did his job better than him. There's one last thing I gotta get off my chest. Whenever somebody says anything good about the Twin Snakes, some idiot fanboy chimes in and says that mechanics like vaulting over rails or shooting in first person make the game too easy. And you can tell they're idiot fanboys, because they completely ignore how much better the enemies are when they have the same AI as the guards in MGS2. Besides the improved enemy AI, Silicon Knights got rid of several exploits from the original game. For example, did you know you can use the PSG-1 to get around the weapon ban in the Warhead storage building? Once you take out all the guards, get into the elevators or walk in the park. They made sure to fix that in the Twin Snakes though, and since the enemies can see and hear you from farther away, getting to the elevator in that game is a lot trickier than it is in the original, assuming you didn't snipe everybody beforehand. It's trickier, but I still wouldn't call it challenging. To be honest, I wouldn't describe anything in the Metal Gear Solid series as a challenge. Even a big boss run on extreme difficulty only feels like an accomplishment if you've never really tried to get better at any other game besides MGS. But I'm not talking about playing the game at a high level, I'm just talking about playing the game normally, for fun, not some Major League Gaming any percent speed run. That's why it's funny to me whenever people complain that it's too easy to do things in the Twin Snakes that were difficult in the original, because what people are accidentally admitting when they say this is that they suck at video games. No remake has ever perfectly captured the magic of the original, so I don't have a problem if somebody prefers Metal Gear Solid over the Twin Snakes. Where I take issue is when people feel the need to tell someone who likes the Twin Snakes why they're wrong for liking it. First of all, nobody asked you. Secondly, people don't play Metal Gear Solid because they're looking for a challenge. That's what Dark Souls is for. The Metal Gear games are campy movies that get interrupted by clunky gameplay. Some people really don't care for the game parts of the Metal Gear series, but they like the cutscenes. And if somebody just wants to be entertained by Kitamura's awesome fight choreography while breezing through a game that was easy as hell to begin with, leave them alone. And let's not forget the people with disabilities who physically can't play games the way the designers intended. Somebody might be struggling to play MGS1 because one of their arms got blown off by an IED. You don't know, so don't assume. Because if you're the type of person who goes around telling people to get good, there's a high probability that you have an anime character in your profile pic, and that's the reason why you don't have any real friends.
Boom. Roasted.